So with the return of the Bundesliga at the weekend, with empty stadiums and the period of lockdown continuing in the UK, there is a real possibility that Premier League matches will be played behind closed doors if this season is to be brought to an end. With that in mind, there's a number of commercial and legal issues that clubs are going to need to consider in relation to the various commercial arrangements that they have around match days. I've got 4 that I'm going to quickly run through on this video nugget, which will hopefully be helpful. The first of those is ticketing. So obviously if fans can't attend matches, there's going to be issues around what happens with tickets, season tickets, match day hospitality packages that have been pre-purchased, and what rights those fans have. So clubs are going to need to look at the terms and conditions under which the relevant ticket or hospitality package was bought. They're going to need to bear in mind the consumer rights that those fans may have, and they're going to have to come up with a clear policy on what they are offering in respect of those tickets based on the rights and obligations which each party may have. It's going to need to be communicated clearly and quickly to fans as well, to allow them to make an informed decision based on the tickets for 1920, but also considering the fact that this may well be extended and we may see games played behind closed doors in the 2020-21 season. So clubs that have auto-renewal packages for season tickets and clubs that factor their season ticket revenue may need to particularly bear that in mind. The second issue is agreements with sponsors and partners. So the clubs are going to need to consider what rights are granted to those sponsors or what obligations the club has under those agreements that may well be affected by games being played behind closed doors. So the club will need to see what it can and cannot provide under the agreement. One example might be, can the club still provide its social media and digital rights? Can it still provide LED advertisements around the side of the pitch for broadcasting? Possibly. Can, on the other hand, the club not provide the matchday hospitality packages and tickets it may offer to the sponsor, player appearances? They may well be problematic. And in those situations, the club's going to need to consider what possible relief it may have from any liability for breach of those obligations, be it a force majeure, material adverse change, or a specific liability carve-out. But another option may also be to the club, can we take those rights that we don't think we're able to grant and either provide alternative rights or defer those rights? So let's take the example of player appearances. If social distancing guidelines prevent players from being able to attend their appearances that they were due to attend under a sponsor agreement, can the club offer an alternative right? Can it offer a digital appearance to offset that? Or can it defer that and say that we will comply with that obligation later and come to some form of agreement about providing the obligation at a later time? That could be a possibility. Also to be considered is the existing supply chain that clubs might have. So a lot of the suppliers that clubs may engage will have a focus on goods and services related to match days. So it'll be important to consider those arrangements and see how they may be impacted. Some of the agreements that might need to be considered are the food and drink arrangements at the stadium, travel services, policing, retail and club merchandise, payment processing at the stadium, those types of agreements. They'll all need to be considered and looked at, and each of the impacts considered. So the club may need to consider amending, suspending, coming to alternative arrangements with those suppliers. Admittedly, a lot of the obligations will often be on the supplier in those cases, but the clubs may also have obligations which it may not be able to comply with. One key example of that may be minimum order volumes, which are often a provision that's included in a pouring rights deal, in food and drink supply, in merchandise supply arrangements, where the club may commit to purchasing a minimum amount of goods or services, be it quarterly, yearly, or by season. And the club will have to assess the impact of the potential for fans to not be in attendance at games may mean that the club's ability to meet those minimum order volumes may be adversely affected. Finally, clubs will need to consider fan engagement and the potential for new suppliers in that area. The inability for fans to attend the game and get the match experience will be a huge loss to clubs, and clubs will need to consider other ways in which they can engage with existing fans and win new fans and grow the brand and influence of the club. And to do that, it may well be that the club needs to carry out a review of its current resources, its current platforms, and see whether they are sufficient to meet this growth in demand and new opportunities that may well be out there. We've already seen players joining Zoom calls and doing digital appearances, lots of different digital content going out there from clubs currently, but the opportunities are only going to increase, and we can see a growth in the likes of esports, the possibility for online events and things like this. The clubs are going to need to consider whether the current supply chain that they have is sufficient to cope with that, to provide those types of engagement and services. And to the extent that the club does need to contract with new suppliers in this difficult time, yes, the club's going to need the usual negotiate robust, strong positions to protect itself, but it's also going to need more than ever to look at flexibility as a key aspect under a contract, to be able to cope with that potential for increase and decrease in demand during these times. Overall, then there's quite a lot of different things. I've covered just a few there for clubs to consider. There is a lot of different potential impacts of games being played behind closed doors, and clubs are going to need to take really important decisions in this time, and now more than ever is a time to be assessing the current state of affairs of clubs and making sure that any decisions that are being made with the right advice.